A recent commentary in China's Xinhua news agency drew comparisons between the situation in Syria and the Iraq War. That military action began in 2003 on the notion that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, a claim that was proven false. I asked Paul Bremer about that comparison. He was the U.S. appointed governor of Iraq following the U.S. invasion. He believes President Obama should look past the comparison.
You know, I think they've made a tactical mistake by, in effect, thinking they're in the pre-Iraq days and where the intelligence is the question. That's not the question. We know chemical weapons were used. Even the UN admits it. Even the Russians admit it. Even Assad admits it, although he says he didn't do it. So it's not an intelligence question that the American people need to be persuaded. They need to be persuaded why it's in American interest that we should take action there. And it seems to me that's what the president is going to have to talk about in his speech on Tuesday night.
I think a lot of people remain unconvinced. I want to ask you about some polls. Several polls have been conducted since this chemical weapons attack, and they consistently show that more than half of the American people don't believe that the U.S. should strike Syria. And that's particularly interesting because most Americans, 82% in this most recent poll, believe Assad did use chemical weapons.
Right.
They still oppose a strike. So what does that tell you about public opinion? How do you think the public would feel, or how could they feel differently if the U.S. perhaps did not go to a war in Iraq?
Well, I don't think it's an Iraq question. You see, that's my point. The American people are persuaded that he used chemical weapons. That's not the issue. It's not an intelligence failure question. The question is in what way are American interests involved, and what American interests are served by some kind of an attack. And I think that's the case that the president and his colleagues have not made over the last week, which allowed the whole congressional mood to switch very strongly against any action.
Well, in your opinion, based on your previous experience, what would be America's interests?
Well, I take a fairly, I'm afraid, realist view. What we're seeing in Syria is, in effect, a proxy war involving Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. They're the only friends Syria has. And the American interest is in not having that congeries of groups succeed. It is, after all, the stated policy of this president that Assad must go. That's regime change. They don't like to use the term regime change because it, too, has been tainted. But effectively, that is in America's interest. It is in America's interest that Assad should go. And we need to make that, the president, I think, needs to make that case more clearly. Maybe he will in his speech on Tuesday night.
I know you said that this situation is different than what happened in Iraq, but I want to ask you about what you said recently, that the U.S. made some major strategic mistakes in Iraq, but that Iraqis are still better off. Do you think that a U.S. strike on Syria would lead to a better life for Syrians?
Well, it would in the long run if it were my view is a pinprick strike, and Secretary Kerry today said we are going to have unbelievably small action. I don't think that's worth doing. I think that will not help the Syrian people at all. I think if we are going to use military force there, we should use it in a way that changes the balance of forces against Assad, makes it difficult, if not impossible, for him to stay in power. Hit the resources that keep him in power, the military forces, the air force, the rocket forces, the ones that use the chemical weapons, and make it more difficult, if not impossible, for him to stay in power. That is, after all, the stated objective when President Obama said 2 years ago, Assad must go. So a pinprick attack is not going to be better for the Syrian people. Changing the regime in the long run will make them better off.
All right, Paul Bremer, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show.